She has a new piece out in Truth Out that I like a lot. I like the news. I like the topic. The headline is Universal Child Care is Popular. New Mexico showed us how we can win it. So, first of all, Sonali, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Richard. Always a pleasure to be with you.
And likewise, so tell us what happened exactly and what's the deal in New Mexico with childcare?
We don't have universal childcare in this country. Depending upon which state you live in and your income, there are different rules for you to be able to qualify for maybe child tax credits or subsidized childcare if you're extremely low income, etc. Otherwise, most people are expected to, pay out of pocket, and childcare is very expensive and on the order of $1,000 a month. And K through 12 is public education covered fully publicly, but pre-K is often not available for free except for certain sectors of the population. We do a lot of means testing, again depending upon the state. And so this idea of universal childcare, where regardless of your income you're eligible, is not a thing that any state has except for now New Mexico. And it was a battle that was fought very sort of powerfully, very strategically for years before winning. And New Mexico has been 48th, 49th, or 50th, depending upon which year you look at it, in the country out of 50 states on the issue of child well-being. And so this was a state that desperately needed to invest its resources in early childhood education, as organizers call childcare, which I think is really great. Yeah, I can tell you how it happened and how they organized it, because I spoke to one of the central organizers around it. But I think it's something that we can and should aim for. It's the kind of thing that Zoran Mamdani has made part of his platform in New York City, running for mayor.
And people are talking as if the world would end if Mamdani became mayor and enacted these kinds of elements of his agenda. So far, the world hasn't ended in New Mexico. I appreciate you bringing up the fact that everywhere in this country we have universal high school and junior high and elementary school and so on. And we're working on after that as well for people who want to continue. So the universal nature of it is obviously important. And I guess we could start with the fact that I think if you haven't raised a child in the United States, if you haven't studied the issue, I think it's mind boggling. It would be mind boggling for those people who haven't experienced that to know just how incredibly expensive it is.
Absolutely. It's expensive. It's out of reach for a lot of people. And the conundrum there, which is very similar to what we see in the elder care industry, is that there's high demand and it's expensive and workers are underpaid. So this confuses people. They're like, well, if there's high demand, wouldn't that just put a pressure on wages to rise? And wouldn't people who are in that industry be better paid? Well, there's only so much that people can pay for childcare, but it's a lot of work in industries, and I say industries, but I should say institutions where human beings require care. It is extremely expensive because you can't have one person taking care of 12 people for 8 hours a day. You have to have a team. It has to be small ratios. And so just as in elder care, where it's extremely expensive to pay for elder care, at the same time that the workers in that industry are horribly underpaid, same with childcare. You have workers that have barely made $8 to $10 an hour, depending upon, again, the state, but in New Mexico was something to that effect, while you have parents barely being able to afford quality childcare for their children. It is definitely the kind of thing that demands government subsidy, just as public education does. And so New Mexico did this beautiful, powerful thing. It was a complicated thing to accomplish because of the way their state's rules work. One thing that makes New Mexico unique is that they have oil and gas, a fund that oil and gas companies who lease lands that they drill onto in the state, they have to pay royalties to the state. So there's this pot of money That's, sort of ill-gotten gains, if you will, because of this fossil fuel industry. But still, there's a specific pot of money that has been used to fund education. So what organizers did was they didn't say, we need to have universal childcare. Where did we get them? We need to find the money somewhere. They said, hey, we already pay for childhood, for education, K through 12, through this fund. If we increased the payout from this fund toward education by 1%, we could cover early childhood education. And they called it early childhood education because in some ways, of course, childcare workers are educators. They're literally teaching your kids things like, potty training them or whatever, alphabets, teaching them their reading to them. So,
Socialization is a
oh,
part of what
yes,
education does.
absolutely.
And so,
Yeah, so basically, so this is what they did. And then in order to do that, they wanted to, of course, the legislature wouldn't do it. So they wanted to have a constitutional amendment that they needed to have a constitutional amendment and have it be put forward as a ballot measure. But in New Mexico, again, unique rules in New Mexico, in order for a ballot measure to be put before voters, the legislature has to approve it first, right? In California, it doesn't work like that. So they tried to do that. And there were a handful of legislators for years who just wouldn't allow it to go forward through the legislature and present it to voters. So what these organizers did was they played the long game and they voted out these elected officials and replaced them with what organizer Andrea Serrano of the group Ole explained to me. She called them values aligned legislators. And over, it was 10 years of delays to get it before voters. After 10 years, when they finally got the legislators in place that they campaigned for, they got the constitutional amendment passed by the legislature, put it before voters, and it got passed by 70% in a state that's considered a swing state. It's considered, a so-called purple state. And so now it's law.
And this is an aspect of the story I really wanted to talk about because it comes out in your article. Yeah, as you write, in fact, while mainstream media outlets are crediting New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham with ushering in universal childcare, you say it's crucial to recognize that a vibrant grassroots bottom-up movement began laying the groundwork years earlier. You mentioned Ole already, and Andrea Serrano. She's the executive director of Ole, which stands for Organizers of the Land the Land of Enchantment. And it's such an instructive lesson to me in so many ways.
Yes.
First of all, that we can't depend on leaders. It has to be an organized grassroots thing. It takes people like Andrea Serrano and other grassroots organizers, many of whom I'm sure worked with her over a period of time. We can't be impatient. And the issues, the right has been very good at, targeting elected officials based on a specific issue. I would think for the left, there's a great lesson there. And that person is preventing you from being able to afford good care for your child so you can go to work. But
exactly. I mean, I think there's also a narrative lesson in this whole story is how they approached it. They were able to point out that the state had a pot of money. They were able to lay the groundwork. They were able to talk to the public. They were able to point out how New Mexico's child well-being statistics are so poor. And it was a matter of extending childhood education to cover childcare before K through 12. And what was also remarkable was that I don't want to discount the fact that they had a governor who was willing to do the right thing. And when I sort of tried to downplay that in my interview with Andrea Serrano, she raised it as being, it was important that the governor understood that she had to be responsive to her constituents. And, there are plenty of, just as there were the legislators who stood in the way of enacting the constitutional amendment, they could have had a governor who stood in the way. So all of these things lined up and allowed and enabled New Mexico to achieve this thing. And it wasn't even after voters passed it, it was a couple of years before it was finally made a reality. And what the governor did was just kept increasing the number of people who were eligible for government subsidized childcare. I believe before she signed it into law this fall, something like people making 400% of the federal poverty line were eligible for government subsidized childcare. She signed into law to basically respect voters' decision in the ballot measure that they passed, and now it's 100%, no matter who you are, what your income is. And you know what that does is it also gets rid of a hell of a lot of paperwork. A lot of times people don't take advantage of government subsidies because A, they might not know that they're eligible, or B, they might talk themselves out of it thinking, for sure, I might be making too much money. And they're burdened by or hindered by the amount of paperwork that they have to fill out, a lot of details. Maybe there's language barriers, literacy issues, whatever it is, it gets in people's way. If it's in universal, it doesn't matter. It's like K through 12 education. The other thing about this story, which I love, is that because the governor signed this into law and made it universal, the childcare workers got a boost. Now there's a minimum floor of, I believe, $18 to $21 an hour that childcare workers are going to make. They're going to get training. So it lifts up the workers as well. And this, of course, is an industry that is majority women of color, immigrant women working in childcare industries. And so I just love it. It's a win-win situation for everybody. It lifts up the workers. It lifts up the parents. Parents are saving on average $12,000 a year in childcare costs thanks to this. And that's going to be money they can put towards all of the necessities that they need, and even, higher education for their kids.
And at the same time, because it's universal, it broadens the political support for it. It's not one constituency's program that you won't notice if you're not a member of that particular socioeconomic bracket or what have you. Everybody, obviously, you need a child but everybody with a family or grandkids or anything, nephews, nieces, siblings, is eligible for this. So people will, as with Social Security or other universal programs, Medicare, it's going to be harder to go after it. Is there any sense yet, before we go, Sonali, is there any sense of, I know it's a brand new program. Is there any sense of what this is going to look like? I mean, they have to open centers, they have to, or physical spaces, they have to train people.
From what I understand, the infrastructure already exists because these are, it's not childcare is not something that, it has to be hyper local. It's not something that requires, each city to have like 4 or 5 large centers like they have large schools where everybody sends their school. It's a neighborhood by neighborhood thing generally. A lot of people run childcare centers out of their homes if they're zoned for it on their small localized spaces. So the infrastructure already does exist. And so what it's going to do is enable those centers to hire more people, train more people, pay the people already working there more, expand and hire more staff. So, and I believe that's also one reason why it was probably a program that was slowly expanded as opposed to overnight make it universal. And so I think it's a wonderful way. And the other aspect of this that I didn't really write about, Richard, is that when you make universal childcare, when you have universal childcare that's fully publicly subsidized, it's a huge boon for women. Women hold back their dreams because they're busy or they can't afford to. It's so much more expensive it's financially more viable for them to tend to stay at home and do childcare. And of course, increasingly men are doing that as well, but it tends to fall
or to limit their careers, or to work part-time, which is in effect the same thing. It's absolutely a great resource. And for men, I think many more men now have wives who make more than they do. And this is across political, from what I recall, across political points of view, men, working class, right, conservative leaning men, they still if my wife gets more money, if the house gets more money, great. There's not that old
Exactly.
school
Yeah.
defensiveness about it.
So you can have two-person income. So not only are you saving $12,000 a year, but you have the possibility of having more income because one person isn't doing so much care. And it can really help boost such a wonderful boost from the bottom up for for people's individual economies. And for me, I think the best part of this is the fact that if New Mexico could do it, think of all the places where it can be possible. And so somebody like Zoran Mamdani can say, I'm not a radical leftist for suggesting that we can get universal childcare in our city. Look at the entire state of New Mexico. A fairly mainstream Democrat signed this into law in a state that's considered a swing state. And once we start really expanding that around the country, what's next? Let's do healthcare next. As you were saying, of course, it's tough to cover Medicare, but people's premiums are going up thanks to the Republicans canceling Obamacare subsidies. And states can and should, California should be moving to single payer healthcare yesterday. And so we really need to start pressuring lawmakers. We need to start voting out those lawmakers who stand in the way. Often it's Democrats who stand in the way, depending upon the state. It of course varies.
Of course, sure.
And so, yeah, I think New Mexico really has shown us what's possible.
Is anyone out working on this child care issue in other states? Because I know, for example, New Mexico has this oil and gas fund you mentioned,
Yeah.
and it's a relatively minor, I think, add-on of 1.25% or something. And I read in your article to fund this. Other places, I mean, Mamdani has a lot to work with in terms of financial transactions and so on. But
yeah, he's basically suggesting a small increase in, I believe, corporate taxation and stuff. I don't know, actually. I'll be very honest. I don't know whether other states are working on it. I do know, depending upon the state you're in, there are different standards. And American government loves means testing. We're constantly deciding who is, quote, deserving of government funded benefits versus who isn't, because we have this sense that anything that you get from the government, you must have earned, you must be deserving. We must test you to ensure you're deserving. This is only a standard that's applied to low incomes, of course, never to high incomes. No one ever asks CEOs to take drug tests, before they can get their huge tax subsidies. But yeah, I think that it's such a patchwork around the country, and enough. It shouldn't be that way. Benefits should be available to anybody and everybody who needs them, because there's always money, as we've seen the way in which the ICE surge has been funded. There's money to do huge signing bonuses for ICE agents, massive salaries, free, I believe it's education. They're basically doing all they can to pour money into ICE agents and then claim, oh, there's never enough money to pay teachers more.
And $20 billion to bail out Argentina. And I mean, we could
yes,
we could go on. Just parenthetically, a few years ago, I wrote an article for the American Prospect on the psychology of means testing and people who want to do means testing. It's a fascinating topic because, of course, if you have means testing, you need means testers, which
is a bureaucracy.
Correctly, I have to say, it perceives as a kind of elitism. I mean, whereas the universality of public schools, the red state teacher strikes were successful because everybody appreciates public education, and we need to replicate that. So and this, if any other states do want to do this, from your article, it sounds like Andreas Serrano from Olay would be a good guide for them.
Yeah, and she's the co-chair of the Working Families Party as well, so she's a national activist. And I got to say, you were saying the right points out that the means testers are bureaucracies, but they're the ones who often push the means testing too, and then argue for small government. But you can't have it both ways, right? Ultimately, what they would like to have is everybody for themselves, survival of the fittest, and have no government subsidy whatsoever, and people just sink or swim. And if that sort of libertarian worldview, that I should say is what sunk Argentina, right?
Right. You have that on the right, but on the left you have the whole skin in the game and shared responsibility, which is wait a minute, if you're talking about universal health care, I literally have skin in the game. That's my
Yes.
skin. And if you're talking about shared responsibility, that's what taxes are for, right?
Exactly,
So
exactly. Yes. So we need more democratic socialists. They don't have to call themselves that, but they can
no,
have these policies that really are so universally popular. Because ultimately, if you ask people to identify themselves politically, they'll identify themselves as being in the center. But if you ask them what their opinions are on big programs that benefit people, most people end up choosing positions that would be considered leftist, even if they don't call themselves leftists. So yeah,
my
there's big openings there.
my theory is everyone thinks they're in the center because I'm reasonable, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if you ask me, am I in the center? Yeah, there are crazy people here and there, but I have like the perfect synthesis of every. It's a stupid question.
yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully we'll start seeing more of it. And hopefully in a few years we'll get some good statistics from New Mexico as well to show how well it works. And, of course, the beauty of such programs is once you start them, it's really hard to take them away because there's, people are invested in them, people rely on them, they have they're stakeholders that get invested in them, and that's really, really important. That's why it's so hard to get rid of Social Security and Medicare, thank goodness, but it's really hard to expand it because the Republicans know that once we expand it, that's it, people are going to rely on it, and they're going to need it and they're going to like it.
we depend on your support here at the Zero Hour, so please give whatever you can at any of the links you see on your screen. Thanks so much.